Hello. Wow, this is really late in coming, I know. I've gotten depressed about YouTube lately, with so many creators talking about making less than they used to. And of course, you can't monetize earlier, like you used to. YouTube's been deleting accounts, and with YouTube being able to develop things with AI from content I've produced for them for free, well, I had considered not even bothering. But here I am. And I'll probably put up a variety of purely Christian related content soon, along with some sort of content about the new Fallout TV series show. Um, okay. Coming from the perspective of being a big Fallout games fan, this series is bad. It has way too much divergence from existing lore, or retcon. It isn't even good from a basic storytelling perspective, which makes it even more disheartening when seeing comments about how great it is. There are some good parts to it from just a show perspective, I guess, but there are just too many major things wrong with it to call it a good show. And by the way, since this is not a basic review but an analysis, there will be spoilers. Let's go over what the overall story is about, or more accurately, stories, since there are two. The in-show present, 219 years after nuclear bombs devastated much of the world, and the past, which takes place over a short period before the bombs fell in 2077. The story of the past far outweighs the present. It needs to be noted that the Fallout universe is one that depicts an alternate modern history, one where the date of divergence hasn't been entirely clear. One game mentions Eisenhower as president, so it diverged either while he was president or at the time he left office, that is, between 1953 and 1961. Clothing and other design elements reflect this period, even though the bombs fell over 100 years later. Okay, so why are these dates important to the show's story? Because the whole past story revolves around a Hollywood figure that is in the midst of a Red Scare, or what is called McCarthyism, which ended in 1954, and the era of blacklists, which saw various filmmaking figures lose jobs and contracts, or prevented them from getting new ones. The blacklists lasted from 1947 to 1960 or so, though I've read about their influence lasting longer. You can even hear people today say so-and-so was blacklisted. Anyway, the historical Red Scares and what they all involved is interesting history, so it could have been a good subject for the show. However, the Red Scare in the show is beginning shortly after the bombs fell. Again, this is over 100 years after the actual Red Scare, so it's not realistic. While the clothes, styles, and such can be considered retro when the bombs fell, I guess we're supposed to just think that blacklisting history is exactly repeating itself 100 plus years later, too. Considering that the US and China were having a conflict in-game, a new Red Scare would seem a reasonable storyline, but the fact that the show uses Hollywood again does not make it seem like a new Red Scare. In any case, this would be fairly innocent or minor annoyance, if that's all there was to it. The real problem isn't history repeating itself. It's the fact that they brought into the story today's real-world divisions, which have turned increasingly deadly. The in-show divisiveness is not at all necessary and is something that is not a part of the game universe. I never once felt any divisiveness in the game over quote-unquote sane people versus Vault-Tec. In the games, it is taken for granted that any normal person would find what Vault-Tec did to be abhorrent. On top of that, they used poor writing and logic in order to show or promote this divisiveness. Because of the poor writing and logic, I actually thought for a while that there was going to be a punchline, that the trajectory of the story was going to end in some sort of joke, but that was not the case. Where does this negative story come from? Where one of the major points made is that the canceling of the communist sympathizers manifests in a degraded society that likes shooting people in the head. In other words, anyone not with them loves hideous violence. It's like the blacklists from 65 plus years ago were fresh on the minds of the scriptwriters, like their anger is still fresh, and they found a project that would let them vent. That project being the Fallout TV series. And it's no secret that much, or most, of Hollywood hates more conservative types. And so, by all appearances, they use the Fallout series to make a story that demonizes those who aren't left enough. One indication of this is that Coop, an actor and the main character of the show, is called a fascist by one of the followers of the communist sympathizing scientist named Miss Williams / Moldavar. But why include this? Not only are conservatives called fascists today, but it's like they're getting back at their foes from the McCarthy era. The actor's name is Cooper Howard, who is also the ghoul in the show's present time, and you can take it that he partially represents Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper testified at the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, as a friendly witness, whereas blacklisted actors and writers refused to testify for this committee. As a note, the HUAC is going to be in Season 2. They were no doubt afraid of what might happen if they admitted they were past Communist Party members, and they for sure didn't want to name co-workers in any testimony. You can't really blame them for these things, in my view. While a small number of people were still communists by the time the hearings took place, and I'm not talking just actors, most had given that up after becoming disillusioned with communist behavior. Read George Orwell's An Homage to Catalonia about the Spanish Civil War where many Americans went to fight, and how the communists turned on each other. It's a fascinating read and a forerunner of 1984 and Animal Farm. Anyway, Gary Cooper was also one of the members of the anti-communist Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, founded in 1944. However, he redeemed himself with many by dropping out of that group and supporting actors and others who had been blacklisted. But Cooper Howard is also based on John Wayne, the iconic actor of Western films. John Wayne was very steadfastly against communism. He became president of the Motion Picture Alliance in 1949, developed and maintained blacklists, and even had cigarette lighters engraved with FUCK communism. The connection to Wayne is obvious when you know that the Spanish language phrase used in the series in relation to the falling of America's culture and to the actor himself was his own favorite phrase that he wanted people to remember him by. Feo, fuerte y formal, meaning ugly, strong, and dignified. The actor in the show was not ugly, but could be considered strong and dignified. But due to the radiation, he became ugly, and he seemed to have lost his dignity. We'll see about his dignity during the second season, no doubt. I'm sure he'll be redeemed in the eyes of the show's writers the way Gary Cooper was. I mentioned that I was going to go over the two storylines, or arcs, but there's very little to the present time one, which showcases a young woman named Lucy. She's fairly ignorant of the world outside of the vault she grew up in, and she's polite, but she's not entirely innocent. In the search for her kidnapped dad, she stumbles into the linking drama of a wanted technology that ends up bringing her to her dad. It's linking, since the ghoulified actor Coop was after the same thing, and this brought Lucy and him together as well, and their voluntary joining at the end is the beginning of things related to Season 2. Just about everything in the present time story is there to bring you back to the story of the past, which will play out more in the next season. A great deal of the details in these stories change the lore of the games, which is ridiculous. It seems totally unnecessary. Just write a story, or stories that match the lore. I don't know why Bethesda agreed to the script. The major new information we get, that Vault Tech executives and other employees were put into stasis in order to run things at the proper time in the future, has the potential to change the lore even more. To flesh out the stories and the changes in lore further, it would be easiest to just hit on most of the episodes, so here we go. Episode 1, The End. So called since it starts off with the end of the story of the past, which is the main arc of the show. It does a good job of capturing the style of the Fallout universe, though the dresses are a bit fancy and the men seem overly snarky. Right off the bat, though, it changes the lore via a radio announcer saying the president's whereabouts were unknown. In the game, the president was killed. This episode introduces the audience to the Brotherhood of Steel, which seems somewhat changed from the lore. The Brotherhood was a more insular group, growing as the families within it grew, and only taking in sponsored outsiders when necessary. Since growth was due to babies, trans members would seem maybe unlikely. The episode, of course, introduces the audience to Lucy and others in Vault 33, and through the gory conflict shown, Wasteland Raiders. Later we find out that the leader of the Raiders, a woman named Moldavar, is supposed to actually be a leader of a remnant of the New California Republic, or NCR. So why in the world was she with a group of Raiders? This makes no sense and is one of the more brazenly dumb parts of the series. The NCR is like the United States military, and arguably the most normal and moral group in the game lore. It doesn't have groups joining the Raiders and killing innocent vault dwellers, so this is just stupid and morally gross. The actor that we saw at the beginning of the episode also makes an appearance, now known simply as the Ghoul. In the game, ghouls are just ghouls. They're sane until they're not. At some point, they turn feral, losing all humanity and becoming ferociously violent. The show changes this, showing that ghouls will turn feral if they don't take a certain drug, and that they have extraordinary healing powers. The show changes so much lore that it seems like the writers hardly knew or cared about any of it. I wouldn't mind too much if Bethesda came out and said the show isn't lore, but all that I've looked up indicated that the show is canon and thus changes the lore of the game, which has been around since 1997. So, much of what had been established for 27 years is now being swept under the rug over this poorly written show. This is just nuts. They must have picked writers based on their fascination with and life dream of retconning. Episode 2, The Target. My favorite episode. Not because it's great in itself, but because actor Michael Emerson, who plays the Enclave scientist Siggy Wilzig, carries much of it with his great acting and maybe personal charisma. Also, his entire character is an Easter egg from the great show Person of Interest. Relating to that show, this Fallout series would undoubtedly be better if J.J. Abrams was involved instead of Jonathan Nolan. But moving on, Siggy is carrying in his person something that every faction wants, a source of unlimited power. You can gather from his conversations with Lucy that he is someone from the past as well, like an important person from Vault-Tec who must have escaped them somehow. While Moldavar is from the past, but is neither a ghoul nor a Vault-Tec employee that had been put in stasis, and thus unexplained, Siggy knows all about all the planned vaults and knows something of Lucy because he knows her surname, so he must have been in stasis too. Another clue supporting this theory is virtually the only humor in the series, and I love it. Love the way Emerson pulled it off. At one point, being very injured, Siggy says he can't go on, and after Lucy tries to encourage him, he says, "No, you see, I've just taken a cyanide pill. Vault-Tec Plan D. It was the most humane product Vault-Tec ever made. It was quick, painless, tasted like banana. I was surprised it wasn't more popular." If you played the games, you can understand about it being the most humane thing Vault-Tec ever made. And it tasted like banana. Why wasn't it more popular? What were plans B and C, by the way? Too funny. He would have been happy to see the large bottle of it that Lucy had discovered in a dilapidated house earlier. Anyway, he'd only know that much about it and be surprised at its lackluster sales if he had been a part of Vault-Tec before the war. So even though he was likely a Vault-Tec employee, you might gather from Ziggy's character that he would not go into a vault and kill the residents for no good reason, which is what the self-righteous Moldavar did. Episode 3, The Head, opens with both a 50s vibe and a modern vibe, since having an Indian director would be quite modern, as well as the white actor having a black wife. The episode's title refers to Siggy's head, which Lucy's now lugging around, but also, I believe, to the series' pronouncement that the supposed new era in America is reflected by the people in power relishing others getting shot in the head. It's so bizarre. This new, supposedly very violent era is ushered in by firing people like the scriptwriter, who was deemed a pinko, that is, communist sympathizer. The actor always used to arrest the bad guy if caught, but now he's told to shoot him in the head. The previous Pinko writer, being a Pinko, was moral and less violent, you see. Coop doesn't want to do the scene. This is also a nod to John Wayne, who sought to maintain standards for his Western characters. In any case, it's a bizarre claim, since it's predominantly leftists today who have shot and killed numerous people, like in churches and even at ICE facilities, with the most well-known being Charlie Kirk. Of course, Trump had also nearly gotten his head blown off in one of the attempts on his life. If you don't think these in-show references have to do with today, I'd like to know what they have to do with. But it's more obvious in episode 7. Vault-Tec was horrific, and there's more than enough material and inferences from the games to come up with derisive dialogue regarding the corporation and its people. Because shooting people in the head is more like what Raiders do, not Vault-Tec, what's funny is Moldovar ends up being like that, the thing she criticizes so self-righteously. But the show thinks she's great, either not seeing or caring about the hypocrisy. Episode 4, The Ghouls. Not much to say here, or this video would be an hour long, except we learned for sure that the ghouls need a drug to stop them from turning feral. Again, this is not in the games, and seems like a really dumb thing to add into the lore. I just can't imagine, all the games, they don't have this in there, so it's just weird. Anyway, it would change the whole ghoul situation. Also, the parts where Lucy's brother is going through a dark vault with a violent, mysterious past is arguably the most game-reminiscent part of the series. Well, besides Lucy wandering the ruinous landscape and the outros. The outros are one of the best things about the series. Episode 5, The Past. I don't feel the need to spend time on this episode, so let's move on. Episode 6, The Trap. By far, this is the worst episode in regards to quality, at least when showing the present time arc. There is gratuitous nudity, Lucy acting out of character, ridiculously false leads, etc. regarding the Vault 4 story. Lucy finds that the woman who kidnapped her dad, who led the group that killed many of her friends, mind you, is worshipped by wastelanders. I'm guessing because she's a seemingly regular human that is still alive over 200 years after the war, for some reason. What is shown in the past arc is much better. It at least makes internal sense, and the historic New York house it was filmed in is wonderful. We find that Coop's dog's name is Roosevelt, which may also point to John Wayne, since he voted for Roosevelt, despite being a conservative. We also find that Vault-Tec is manipulating the government to maintain its stock value. The actor who voices the Robco robots is there, even though other actors are shunning Coop, didn't show up. Anyway, the voice actor states that everything's a product now, even the end of the world. To further jab at the creatives who contracted with Vault-Tec, the script has the voice actor disparagingly say that the robots were made for housewives and perverts, meaning gays. Overall, it's obvious that Vault-Tec is basically taking the place of both the military-industrial complex and McCarthyism. The movie Big Jim McLean, which was a positive take on McCarthy and the HUAC, starred John Wayne, and Lucy's last name, McLean, is virtually the same. As mentioned earlier, Gary Cooper supported various anti-communist activities, at least at first. So you have these characters and their real counterparts being shunned by their actor colleagues, and two of the main characters have basically the same movie name for Senator McCarthy. Episode 7, The Radio. Or as I'd call it, forget Animal Farm, communists were just misunderstood. This is the most significant episode when it comes to false or contorted history coupled with injected politics of our own present day. The show hints at the cult-like nature of Moldovar's followers and shows her as an actual cult figure in the previous episode. And now episode 7 shows her in the past, in a church-like setting, with her taking the place of a preacher. Usually this kind of thing hints at negative things to come, in any story and also in the Fallout universe. And as I said earlier, I kept thinking there was going to be a punchline regarding this character. But no, she's just the hero in the end. Her name in the past is Ms. Williams, but Moldovar for some reason in the post-war wasteland. The whole scene in the cemetery chapel and halls is filled with crazy logic and grammar. The group is against Vault-Tec, and Coop has been promoting Vault-Tec, but without knowing how sinister the company is. Ms. Williams wants to enlighten him. However, instead of just saying what they are doing, which everyone would agree is wrong, that is what Vault-Tec is doing, she says that people in the U.S. have more in common with people in China than with the people who lead the U.S. That might possibly be true, but the people of the U.S. wouldn't have more in common with the leaders of China. It's a deceptive statement, and Coop calls it BS. Then he gets called a fascist by one of Ms. Williams' followers. This is what leftists and Antifa today in the U.S. call people who disagree with them. In any case, even after Coop is insulted by both Williams and the follower, she asks him for a favor. Being a scientist who got fired after her company was bought out, she wants Coop to get her cold fusion discovery back. Vault-Tec has it, and Coop's wife works for Vault-Tec. And Coop doesn't know about his wife. He doesn't actually know what Vault-Tec and his wife are planning, Williams says. And that is true. Weirdly, the writers worked in a comment by Coop that doesn't really make sense, just so Williams can respond with an even more nonsensical statement about hypocrisy. He says it's hypocritical that she's so rich, like as if she owned the company that got bought out. So she's a hypocrite talking about the poor Chinese. She responds with, "If you only let the bad guys use it, the bad guys win." Okay, so if the bad guys win by using hypocrisy, then she's saying that she'll turn bad in order to win. Very Machiavellian and not necessary. Most anti-heroes make more sense. Coop responds with this great example of modern grammar. A good bad guy doesn't see themselves as the bad guy. This whole conversation is so weird that I'm not sure whether he's telling her that she's deluding herself and thinking she's good, or if he's referring to Vault-Tec, or perhaps something or someone else. Another point Williams/Moldovar tries to make is that she and people like her are not communists. They're just being called that because they are the same people who recognize what Vault-Tec is doing. This claim of hers is not parallel to what happened or what it was like in the real world, in history. The Red Scare happened because there were indeed spies and traitors in the U.S. Of course, McCarthy went too far, and the blacklists were ridiculous. A few entertainment industry people were communists, while many of them were past communists. It was a common thing with the fervor of supporting the fighters of the fascists in Spain before World War II began. But post-war, it had nothing to do with who was sane or insane in their thinking. McCarthy went too far, it was recognized, and he was deposed in shame. That the film industry kept people blacklisted for some years afterwards had nothing to do with the government, as far as I know. The writers of the show, I guess, felt free, finally, to write something about this era since it wasn't produced by Hollywood, but by Amazon. In any case, it was an unnecessary and negative thing to have in the show. There's nothing like it in the games, and it goes against the whole regular person thing that the games seem to glorify. The government, the Chinese, the scientists, the corporations, they are all made fun of in the games. You, the player, are deemed sane without being an angry communist sympathizer. Episode 8, The Beginning. Being the last episode of the season, there's sort of a lot going on to wrap up the stories. Lucy's story had been extremely simple all along, being basically a side quest that moves the main story along. I guess the show needed a female main character and some romance to keep the audience's pulse going. The title of the episode, The Beginning, refers to Coop's newfound understanding about his wife and the company he'd been representing, Vault-Tec, the beginning of true knowledge and his true self, which apparently only the cult could provide. It's also the beginning of the next story arc, where Lucy and the ghoul stop being enemies and start traveling together, since their goals of finding Lucy's father, again, align. Even though it was not announced during the show that a second season was planned, it seems to me that the writers were pretty sure that they were going to get a second season. The 8 episodes are clearly an introduction to their Fallout universe and are the first part of a longer story. So, what's important to bring up here? 2 major things, as I see it, relating to Fallout universe retconning and changing things for modern audiences. First, we learned in this episode that Vault-Tec people were put into stasis until Either they need to be released to work in a vault, or when their version of the beginning of civilization was at hand. Lucy's dad was one of these people. I'm guessing Siggy was one too, but he had escaped. Who knows how Moldavar has lived so long, however. Anyway, this is a whole new thing in the Fallout universe, and while it makes sense to me regarding what Vault-Tec executives might have thought, there's no hint of it in the games. In a Fallout 4 DLC, the head of Nuka-Cola has his head preserved via a cryo method, and this was not very satisfactory, let's say. In Fallout 4 itself, your character and the others in your vault are preserved whole body, cryogenically, but no one from Vault-Tec is ever around to wake you up. Considering what we see in the show, the Vault-Tec employee in charge of that vault, or someone similar, would have taken control of you and the others at a certain point. I'm not sure, but the Vault-Tec people do not seem to be kept cryogenically. A different example is from Fallout New Vegas, where Mr. House is somewhat preserved in what I'll call a stasis pod. For whatever reason, he's alive, but just barely. He's all shriveled and pretty dead-looking. Seeing as Mr. House is in Episode 8 and went along with Vault-Tec's plans, well, we'll see what they make of this in Season 2. Anyway, with all those Vault-Tec people still alive in stasis, it opens the door for more diverse game stories in the future. But seeing as most vaults were abandoned before this time, it just doesn't coincide with the long-established lore. What's jolting and goes against the lore being established in the show is that Lucy's dad destroys Shady Sands, which was started by a Vault-Tec employee. His action was so strange, since re-establishing civilization is what Vault-Tec staff were supposed to do, so he went against his own firm and people. Makes absolutely no sense. In addition to that, the destruction of Shady Sands seems to contradict established lore. Shady Sands was central to the NCR, and in the games the NCR is a large and prevalent group. In the show, they seem to be virtually non-existent. Moldavar is shown to be an NCR remnant, holed up with supposed raggedy NCR soldiers. As I've mentioned, at the beginning of the show, she's with raiders who kill a bunch of vault dwellers for no real reason, and even Lucy was almost a victim. NCR would never do this, and it's just so amazingly absurd. From what you find out in this last episode, Moldavar would never want Lucy or her brother killed either. So what she does in episode 1 is nonsensical. If the NCR had wanted Lucy's dad, they would have entered the vault and then just demanded him. Now, changes for the quote-unquote modern audience. It's as though they couldn't stand the wholesome story of Fallout 3, so they came up with a parallel story that nullifies the goodness of the father figure and heterosexual marriage. The Bible is quoted in Fallout 3, and that quote is central. And even though that quote is applied in an earthly sense for an earthly good, this apparently would offend the modern audience. Which, by the way, has already proven to not be a big enough group to base one's sales on. Anyway, in Fallout 3, your character, the grown child of a scientist, leaves the vault to look for father after he secretly left. Your mom was already gone, having died in childbirth. Your dad's idea was for you to remain in the vault, all safe and sound, but his leaving caused all kinds of bloody mayhem that he obviously didn't foresee. So you are actually forced to leave. Your character discovers that he left to finish your mom's idealistic work, the building of a radiation filtration plant, so that people could have free, non-irradiated water. Shortly after finally finding your dad, he dies in a selfless act. In the Fallout TV series, the daughter goes looking for her dad after he's kidnapped by the people who butchered many of the other vault dwellers. Once she finds him, she is told the truth about him by Moldavar, that he's part of a very sadistic and manipulative corporation, and that he had a great many people killed by bombing Shady Sands. Her mom hadn't died like she was told, but had run away from the vault and lived in Shady Sands. She didn't die in the bombing, though, but became a ghoul, and was still alive as a very decrepit feral ghoul. She had been Moldavar's lover. In the end, Lucy is of course incredibly conflicted, but never asks Moldavar why she saw fit to go into the vault and kill so many people, even almost her and her brother. This is just crazy. Lucy should have asked Moldavar how is it that she was any better than her father. In any case, Moldavar ends up dying from the Brotherhood of Steel attack that ensues, and so Lucy shoots her tied-up feral ghoul mother before she leaves. It's all just such a pretty family picture, right? Another parallel thing is that Moldavar provided a utility to the wasteland. In Fallout 3, it was free clean water. In the show, it's free unlimited electricity. Okay, to sum up, 3 things. There are way too many changes to the lore of Fallout. Bethesda should come out and say that the show isn't lore, and if there's something from the show that they indeed would like to add to the lore, then add it to a game. It makes no sense for a new show to come along, one that appears to have been not closely monitored by Bethesda, and change lore that has developed over a generation. I really have lost respect for Bethesda and no longer anticipate their games coming out, even though I used to trustingly pre-order their games. No more, no way. Part of my loss of respect has to also do with their lame communications to fans. The recent Fallout Day show was lame, with the pre-show material being better than the show. It astounds me, with all their staff, that they aren't doing more with Fallout, which is such an iconic franchise. 2, the quality of the show. The show has lots of contradictions. Vault Tech was demonized, and rightly so, but more extensively or in a different way than in the games. Think about this for a sec. The only good main character, Lucy, was the product of being raised in a Vault Tech vault, and by the villain of the show to boot. Yet somehow she turned out morally good. That's just one thing. I already have talked about others. 3, regarding the overall storyline, it's sad that they couldn't have come up with something that related to a future time in America, which relates to the game's timeline, instead of basically repeating late 1940s to early 1950s history. The game universe is retro for a reason, but the Fallout world was not the same in 2077. If they stuck to the game timeline and lore, they could have actually come up with something special and probably wouldn't have retconned so much as well. They also ridiculously brought modern divisive politics into the story. Okay, that's all for now. I'll be watching Season 2 and commenting on those episodes in some form anyway. Thanks so much for tuning in. Honestly, thank you very much.